where we can change things up a little bit. So here I'm talking to you guys on a Tuesday that has been dubbed Music Industry Blackout Tuesday, which basically means there were no releases today, there was no promotion today, there was no music being produced today. Instead, we took the time to raise awareness for issues that are really important, and I'm gonna try to do the same thing with issues that I feel I'm qualified to talk about. So with KEiiNO being a Scandinavian group and me being a German, which makes us all pretty white, I think it's a good opportunity to talk about white privilege. White privilege can be as simple as walking the streets, doing ordinary everyday things such as going to the store, going shopping, going to school, and not being stared at because you look different, because you have a different skin color. White privilege is being a kid at home, doing your homework, not having to worry about your father not coming home that day because he got shot by the police, as we've seen just a week ago. Not just because he might be confused for a criminal, but also just for the reason that he looks different. When it comes to music, there's also different instances of it. For example, being an artist and being able to take on an edgy hip-hop image when you think it suits your career, and also being able to drop that image whenever you think it suits your career, basically wearing it like a costume. Shout out Miley Cyrus. Also basically just the ability to get a huge, wide mainstream audience for your art. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of black artists in the mainstream right now, but it hasn't always been that case. So if you look at music history, there's a phenomenon that you just cannot ignore, which is called whitewashing of culture, whitewashing of music, which basically means white performers benefiting from a black pioneered culture. A good example is rock and roll, where you have all these black pioneers such as B.B. King, for example, but if you ask someone who's the king of rock and roll, they will probably say Elvis Presley, who is in mainstream consensus considered the king of rock and roll, a white performer who benefited from all the black pioneers that came before him, but has been built up by the gatekeepers back then, music executives who deemed him appropriate to market to a white audience. You have reggae music. Everybody knows Bob Marley and I Shot the Sheriff, which has not been a hit when it got first released by Bob Marley, but became a hit in 1974 when Eric Clapton released a version of the song, who's a white performer. And you also, later on, nowadays, you have electronic music, you have EDM music, you have all these festivals all over the world where all these European DJs and American DJs play fist-pumping EDM music, this big, huge, fun experience. And many people who go there and who enjoy this kind of music probably wouldn't know that it actually comes from house music and Chicago house, which was pioneered by black people. So all these examples are part of a phenomenon that's called whitewashing, which basically means that there's an original kind of music originated in black culture, and there's usually a process that comes shortly after a new trend emerges, which basically consists of rich white music executives, the gatekeepers, trying to launch a more polished, less raw, less edgy version of the original that they deem more suitable for top 40 radio. Usually with a white performer, usually with a more toned down sound, lyrics that are deemed more family friendly, more radio friendly, and also less thought inspiring. Basically just stuff you hear on the radio. So in the 90s with hip-hop, we have kind of a different story. We saw some change happening there. Obviously you have black hip-hop artists who got to immense fame, the biggest being obviously Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac. But also then, if you think about, for example, Eminem, he is someone that got way more of a mainstream recognition when it comes to chart success and mainstream appeal. It's even kind of stunning if you think about it, that he probably got away with saying things that a black artist never could. So of course when Eminem came out, there was outrage about his lyrics and there were parents protesting against the things he was saying on his records, but ultimately it was still this kind of exciting pop phenomenon. Like, you have to listen to the things he's saying, and some people were like, you have to see it from this kind of perspective, and people making excuses, and ultimately he was huge and a huge part in pop culture, to a point where if you had a black artist saying these things that he said on his records, it would be just not being played. So for a long time you have this phenomenon that you get away with more if you're a white artist. But with hip-hop going into today's music scene and today's music, we saw more of a change coming, which is basically because the structures of the gatekeeping changed. So you don't have the small group of music executives who decide what's being listened to and what's playing on the radio, and everything listens to only that, which was the case for probably hundreds of years, at least 100 years since you have recorded music. But now, thanks to the internet, thanks to people being able to upload their music to SoundCloud and streaming platforms, and basically the democratization of music creation, we see a change happening here. So it's impossible to ignore that the original is there and there's all these black artists doing amazing music, and you can't just sweep them under the rug anymore like the industry did for decades and decades. Which is great, which is an amazing change, but we're still not completely there yet, as you see in a few examples that are still happening today. Let's take, for example, an artist like Drake, who is a huge superstar right now, probably the biggest male artist right now in the US or maybe even worldwide. And he had a song called Hotline Bling, which was a huge hit and even won a Grammy. But he didn't win a Grammy award for Best Pop Song or Best Song. He won the Grammy for Best Rap Performance, which kind of shows that there's still these structures in place that basically say, if it's a black person doing it, it's a rap song. It's black music. It's like nothing we want to have in our little pop microcosmos. That's something we still have to think about nowadays, how our reception can shift and how we still put artists in these boxes. And I think this is why the topic of cultural appropriation is still pretty hurtful to many people of color. Even though in an ideal world, obviously, I think it's great to mix different influences and to being able to interpret culture the way you like it and to put your own spin on musical genres, no matter what the color of your skin is. It's still important to keep in mind where the original is coming from and whose contribution to the culture you're benefiting from in that moment. I think that's something that we as music creators have to be constantly aware of, and also kind of have the mission to educate especially younger fans, to show them we didn't just come up with this. There's this huge pool of rich culture that we're taking from. So I think this is a huge responsibility. So for example, me as a producer of KEiiNO, which is a very Scandinavian, very white group, I use a lot of influences that come from black culture. I think it's very important for the fans to be aware of this fact, that you can actually hear it all over their records. May it be hip-hop influences, or may it be disco and house influences. Or even reggae.
Is there something you should tell me?
And also dancehall influences.
I'm the morning baby. Me, you are letting, girl, I'm not betting.
I think This is just one of many issues that we should be reflecting on when we think of issues of underlying racism and privilege. These are probably just small issues compared to the real problems people of color are still facing every day. Nonetheless, it's part of it. And me being a musician, I feel it's something I'm obliged to talk about. It's something where I can use my platform and add something to the conversation. Now, when it comes to the big picture, there are lots of activists and especially people of color who are directly affected, who are way more qualified than me to speak up about it, to educate. So listen to them. I will try to gather some resources and post them in the comments here so you can educate yourself further on that. And that brings me to just a few things that I wanted to add at the end of this video. Most importantly, what can you do? What can I do? What can we all do as a society to shift forward? And there's a few things that you all can do. For example, the first thing you can do is look up where you find the next Black Lives Matter protest or rally in your area, because I think right now there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on around you. There's a lot of people raising their voice, speaking up, and there's a lot of opportunity to listen and to learn. So join in public, join the marches. It's so important that every person shows up. But it's also important to speak up yourself when you have the chance to. And when you see things happening, for example, at a family gathering, when the drunk uncle has a drink too many and comes up with some nonsense, it's important that you speak up, because no matter how young you are, you have a voice. And when you speak up for the right thing, you are doing the right thing. It doesn't matter how much discomfort you cause. There's really no sitting on the fence anymore with these issues. It's actually not even a political issue. It's an issue of human rights. It's not a question of if a highway should be built or if taxes should be raised. It's a basic issue of every human being deserving the same kind of respect. Also, speak up in public. Speak up in your circle of friends. When you hear someone dropping irresponsible remarks, speak up against it, because it is important. Every mind that is changed, every person who makes inappropriate remarks and gets corrected and gets shut down is a little win and a little progress. And obviously also listen, reflect, and very, very importantly, be willing to change thought patterns and be willing to get out of your own comfort zone. Breaking out of this, starting the change with yourself is the first step. So don't hide, don't duck away, use your voice, because it matters. Thank you.